So it's about the distinction between the fear of death and the fear of pain or dying painfully. The person says the fear of death is one thing, I think you said, but the fear of pain or the fear of dying painfully is another thing. And I hear that very much. The fear of death is one thing. I'm not afraid of death. What I'm afraid of is death. So, it's like, I'm not afraid of death as long as I die in just, hold on, let me just describe my perfect death for you. And as long as it happens like that, I'm not afraid of it. Except your capacity to control that is very limited. And we seem to say the common preference, which I think is something weird but not unsurprising about the culture, is, I'd like to die peacefully in my sleep in my 90s or something, or some version of that. Seems to me to be really, what a drag. I spent all this time preparing for it, and then I'm asleep and I don't even notice it. No, I'm kind of, So of course we wouldn't wish pain on ourselves or on others, right? We don't want to die painfully, of course. And given the lack of control, like Frank's line, expecting that when death comes, that I'll have this physical strength, the emotional stability, and the mental clarity. That's a big gamble, right? So who knows? Who knows, right? What conditions you'll die in. You don't have any control over that. What you do have control in is, what's my relationship to pain like now? How can I enter into pain when it comes with a certain kind of graciousness and interest and gentleness and forgiveness, etc. And one of the fantastic things about meditation is it's a very rare situation, in as much as you have control over pain. Like most situations, you don't have much control over pain, right? You hurt yourself, it's painful until it heals. You get sick, it's painful until you get better. But with meditation, it's painful. All you have to do is go, and the pain goes. So it's a really interesting environment where you can kind of enter into discomfort, and you can bring those qualities of gentleness and spaciousness and relaxation until it's too much. And when it's too much, there's no point in trying to persist in some kind of hardcore kind of way. So when it's too much, you can adjust, you can change your posture, you can avert your attention, you can redirect your energy. So in that sense, it's a very rare and precious kind of situation for developing a freer relationship with pain, it seems to me. One of the things that's interesting when the mind goes, if you like, dementia, etc., and it can be very distressing for people going in the disorientation of dementia, etc., and it can be distressing for loved ones who are maybe no longer recognized by the person, etc. Often where the distress is most intense is the incapacity to exchange relevant information. So the person may not know what day it is, their memories may be all scrambled, their sense of who people are, and that can be distressing for themselves, the person, and it can be distressing for the relatives. So, but maybe information exchange isn't really the most important thing in that situation. I had a very good, dear friend, who's also a very long-term Dharma practitioner and Dharma teacher. I had a very severe brain injury from a bicycle accident. And I spent quite a lot of time with him in the first month after the accident, where he didn't know anything anymore about his life. He He recognised his wife was the only person he recognised, but he didn't remember her name. He didn't know what wife meant. He didn't understand the concept of being married. He had no memories from anything in his life at all. He knew his name, his first name. That was the only thing he could relate to. So any attempt to tell him about details of his life, or any attempt to say anything about oneself, come in, he'd say, oh, where have you come from? And if I tried to tell him, oh, I drove in from San Francisco, it would just be confusing. But his capacity for presence was pretty much undimmed by the loss of his mind, the loss of memory, the loss of conceptual apparatus. And so very quickly, we gave up trying to do any of that information exchange, which one, it didn't work, and two, it just agitated him. We'd just hang out and say, how are you doing? And then some of his descriptions, because his language was off, his descriptions of what's it like being here right now were really wild and weird. But underneath the wild and weird descriptions, there's just presence. And so even though the way he described presence, I'd say, oh, what's it like being here now? And he would start talking about waterfalls and so, okay, we'll go there, waterfalls or what else. And so whether it's, I think one of the things you can do to support somebody else when they've kind of lost the usual conceptual and memory relationship to reality is leave that stuff aside as much as possible and engage with them in the most simple, direct, here, now, contact way. And in terms of the kind of protection against that happening oneself, same thing I would say, just to foster the capacity for presence, because everything else is going. Physical faculties, sensory faculties, the mental faculties, they're all going. And they're going on a time scale that's not of our choosing. And I remember in my 20s or 30s, sitting with a group of Dharma teachers who were in their 50s and 60s, and they were talking about kind of the beginnings of not being able to, what's that person's name? The beginnings of memory loss. And I was like, blimey. And now, it's only just beginning, but I'm just realising I'm getting to that age where memory retrieval just isn't quite as, it's just not quite as sharp or accessible as it once was. Fuck. And it's quite, well, it can be humiliating, right? If you hold on to some self-image of how, or it can be humbling. It's like, oh yeah, just like this, physical aging is just, it's built in, it's normal, it's part of the nature of birth and death. Oh yeah, so mental decay is also part of that. And the recognition, it's one thing to recognise everyone's past one's physical prime, another thing to go past my mental prime. Oh dear. And yet, the fantastic thing about the way consciousness isn't limited to our mental faculties, isn't limited at all to information exchange or information retrieval. And so prioritizing the deathless, I would say, is the best protection against mental decay. So it could sound like that. But no, I would say one's actually much more able to fully experience it, because the experience of it isn't clouded by being bound up with it, being identified with it, taking it so personally. What we call fully experiencing my emotions usually just means wallowing around in a lot of drama. Oh, is that fully experiencing emotion, or is it being at the mercy of an emotion? So actually, to be present enough that we actually, it's like we feel it without feeding it. That's a much more efficient and real way, I would say, of processing. And what we find is emotions they don't actually require that much time to process. Emotions are very brief. They're really, really brief. An emotional wave is like, I don't want to put a time on it, but it's very brief. But usually we grab hold of it as it passes, and instead of letting it wash through us as a wave, we grab hold of it and it becomes more like a washing machine than a wave. And then we go round and round with it, round and round with it. Oh God, I'm processing a lot of emotion at the moment. Oh God, are you really processing it? Or are you just like, you just put yourself on like a maximum cycle? So, of course, there is the danger of a kind of shutdown and a bypassing, but that's not what we're speaking about. That's the flip side, right, of non-processing. So some of us have the tendency to be more lost in the drama, and some of us have the tendency to just kind of clamp down and shut down and not feel. And what the Buddha calls, this practice of middle way, of avoiding the extremes, is to recognize, okay, and we all have the capacity for both, but most of us can recognize we're more on one spectrum, one end than the other. We more tend towards, wallowing in the drama, or we tend towards just more sort of swallowing it and shutting it down. So either way, actually, the sense of just the willingness to be in the midst of, to inhabit without feeding it or suppressing it. Yeah. I've talked about inhabiting, which sounds like really going inside of what's happening, and also that mindfulness, which suggests a kind of pulling back from, right? And that those sound like they're opposites. So they're both images or directions or orientations are pointing to and are providing images of being spacious, we could say, with experience, right? And they sound like opposites, but actually, if we go in, let's take the breath. We go really inhabit the breath. We come inside the breath. Let your awareness dwell in the breathing. What we find is there's space in the breath. There's space. Only breath can be happening, and there can be this sense of an indwelling presence, which we might call mindfulness. In the midst, we can be present, conscious, awake in the midst of breath. And what we find is that the space inside the breath is also simultaneously space around the breath. And that doesn't make sense, like a few other things we said today, this morning, that don't make sense. But, experientially, it's just true that to be spacious, really, with experience, we can either experience as being the space within experience or as the space around experience. The reason and I would say the Buddha did too, but the reason I think it's important to emphasize the inhabiting, it's better, and I'll say why. It's better to go in and to find that the space within is also the space around. Because if you start just by going away, you tend to be withdrawing, which is different than being spacious, And that tends to be a kind of, we're trying to meet our experience at a remove. And because of a lot of the experience we're meeting in meditation is uncomfortable experience, let's face it. Oh, my busy mind. Oh, uncomfortable legs. Oh, restless nature. We easily end up manufacturing, it's like, let me be spacious around that, we say. But what we really mean is, let me get the fuck away from it a bit. Let me, try and meet it like that. Oh, I'm trying to be free from my experience. I'm trying to have some space around my experience. So I think that's why I have more faith in going in to find the space. And then you'll find that actually an inward spacious abiding is the same as a genuinely kind of vast spacious abiding. But find the vastness inside the experience rather than trying to get it outside the experience.